The text came at 3 a.m. Sarah, I messed up. Really bad. Need to talk ASAP. I stared at my phone, already knowing what my brother had done. The crypto market had crashed overnight, wiping out billions in digital assets. And knowing Mike, he hadn't just lost his own money, he'd lost our parents' entire retirement fund. My name is Sarah Anderson, and at 32, I was about to deal with the fallout of my younger brother's biggest mistake yet. The next morning, Mike showed up at my apartment looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfectly styled hair was a mess, and his designer clothes were wrinkled, a far cry from the cocky crypto millionaire he proclaimed himself to be at Thanksgiving. How bad? I asked, letting him in. He collapsed onto my couch, running his hands through his hair. Everything. The whole investment, gone. $2.4 million, just vanished. I sat down slowly, the magnitude of what he'd done sinking in. Mom and Dad's entire retirement fund? He nodded miserably. The market crashed. The exchange went bankrupt. But there's still a chance, if we can access the private wallet where I transferred some of the coins. Some? I interrupted. How much? About half. But I lost the recovery phrase, and without it, he trailed off, looking at me hopefully. You're good with this tech stuff, right? Maybe you could help me figure out how to get it back. I almost laughed. Mike had always dismissed my work in cybersecurity as boring tech stuff, preferring to trust cryptocurrency influencers and get-rich-quick schemes. Now he wanted my help. Let me get this straight, I said, keeping my voice level. You took our parents' retirement savings, money they spent 40 years building, and put it into crypto without their knowledge. I was trying to help them, he protested. Their traditional investments were too slow. Crypto was supposed to multiply their money. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, needing a moment to control my anger. Through the window, I could see the small cafe where Mom and Dad used to take us for Sunday brunch. They'd worked their whole lives to build that retirement fund. Dad as a high school teacher, Mom as a nurse. 40 years of careful saving, gone because my brother thought he knew better. They don't know yet, do they? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mike shook his head. I was waiting for the market to recover. It always recovers, right? Not this time, I said, turning back to face him. The exchange you used is bankrupt, Mike. It's over. He jumped up, pacing my small living room. But the private wallet? If we can just recover those coins. I watched him, an idea forming in my mind. 2 weeks ago, when I first suspected Mike was in over his head, I'd done some digging. I found his wallet addresses, traced his transactions, and yes, I found the recovery phrase he thought he'd lost. But Mike didn't need to know that. Not yet. What exactly did you do with the recovery phrase? I asked. I wrote it down. I know I did. It was on a piece of paper in my apartment, but I can't find it anywhere. He ran his hands through his hair again, making it stand up even more. Sarah, please, you have to help me fix this. I thought about our parents, how Dad had put off retiring for 5 extra years to build their nest egg, how Mom still picked up extra shifts at the hospital even though her arthritis made it painful to stand for long periods. Okay, I said finally. I'll help. But we do this my way. Mike's face lit up. Really? You can recover the wallet? Maybe. But first, you need to tell Mom and Dad the truth. His expression fell. I can't? It'll kill them. They need to know, Mike, and it needs to come from you. He sank back onto the couch, looking smaller somehow. Will you come with me? I nodded, already planning the next steps in my head. We'll go tonight, but remember, this is just the beginning. If you want my help recovering those coins, you're going to have to do exactly what I say. That evening, we drove to our parents' house in silence. The modest 2-story home where we'd grown up looked exactly the same. Mom's flower garden blooming despite the early spring chill, Dad's old Volvo in the driveway. Mike's hands were shaking as we walked up to the door. I could have told him then that I had the recovery phrase, that half their money might still be recoverable. But he needed to face this moment, needed to see exactly what his reckless actions had done to the people who trusted him. Mom answered the door, her face lighting up when she saw us. What a surprise. Come in, come in. I just made coffee. Dad was in his usual spot in the living room, grading papers at his desk. Even after retiring, he still substituted at the high school a few days a week, to stay sharp, he said, though we knew it was also to help build their savings. Their savings. The thought made my stomach turn. Mom, Dad. Mike started, his voice cracking. I need to tell you something. They sat together on the couch, concern growing on their faces as Mike struggled to find the words. Finally, I stepped in. Mike made some investment decisions, I said gently, with your retirement fund. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. What do you mean? Mike couldn't meet their eyes as he explained. How he convinced their financial advisor to transfer the money, how he'd invested it all in cryptocurrency, how it had seemed like a sure thing until it wasn't. The silence that followed his confession was deafening. All of it? Dad finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Everything we saved. Mike nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry. I thought I could make it grow faster, give you the retirement you deserved. Mom's face had gone pale. But how will we? She couldn't finish the sentence. I watched as the reality of what Mike had done sank in. All their plans. The small condo in Florida they'd been looking at, the trip to Europe they'd been saving for, the comfortable retirement they'd worked so hard to build, gone because my brother thought he knew better than 40 years of careful planning. There might be a way to recover some of it, I said carefully. About half the money was transferred to a private wallet. If we can access that wallet, those funds might still be there. Hope flickered across their faces, but I could see the trust was already broken. Mike had always been their golden child, the charming son who could talk his way out of anything. But not this time. I trusted you, Dad said, his voice heavy with disappointment. We trusted you. Mike broke down completely then, sobbing like I hadn't seen since we were kids. I'll fix this, he promised between tears. I'll work 3 jobs if I have to. I'll pay back every penny. But we all knew that was impossible. Even if he worked for the next 20 years, he couldn't replace what they'd lost. As we drove back to my place later that night, Mike was quiet, the weight of what he'd done finally sinking in. What do we do now? He asked as I parked outside my building. I thought about the recovery phrase stored safely in my encrypted files, about the plan I'd been forming since I first discovered what he'd done. Now, I said, you learned what it means to be responsible for your actions. If you want my help recovering those coins, you're going to have to earn it. How? First, you're going to sell your fancy car, your designer clothes, everything you bought with Mom and Dad's money. Every penny goes to them. He nodded quickly. Of course, anything. Second, you're going to move back home and help them. Dad shouldn't be working at his age, and Mom's arthritis is getting worse. They need support, not someone gambling with their future. Okay, he agreed, though I could see him struggling with the idea of giving up his downtown apartment and luxury lifestyle. And third, I continued, you're going to learn exactly how cryptocurrency works, not from influencers and Reddit posts, but from actual experts. I've arranged for you to take some courses at the Tech Institute where I teach part-time. He looked at me in surprise. You teach 2 nights a week, cybersecurity and blockchain technology. Maybe if you paid attention to what I do for a living instead of dismissing it as boring tech stuff, you wouldn't be in this mess. The jab hit home. Mike slumped in his seat, all his usual bravado gone. How long will it take? To recover the wallet? I smiled slightly. That depends on you. Show me you're serious about making things right, and we'll talk about the recovery phrase. As he got out of my car, I could see him processing everything, the magnitude of what he'd lost, the long road ahead to even begin making amends. Good. He needed to feel this to understand that actions have consequences, because what he didn't know was that this was just the beginning of his lesson. The next few weeks tested Mike in ways he'd never experienced. True to his word, he sold his Tesla, his designer wardrobe, and moved back into our parents' house. His downtown apartment went on the market, though the real estate agent warned it might take months to find a buyer in the current market. I watched from a distance as he struggled to adjust to his new reality. Every morning, he drove Dad to the high school in our old family Honda, then spent his days helping Mom around the house and applying for jobs. His crypto trading friends stopped calling once word got out about his losses. Meanwhile, I kept the recovery phrase safely encrypted, waiting to see if Mike's transformation was genuine or just another act. One evening, about a month after the confession, I stopped by our parents' house to check on things. I found Mike in the kitchen, helping Mom with dinner. He was wearing an old t-shirt and jeans, a far cry from his usual designer outfits. The hospital called. Mom said as I sat down at the counter. They're offering me my old position back full-time. Mom, no, Mike protested. Your arthritis. We need the money, she said simply. Your father's substitute teaching salary isn't enough. I watched the guilt wash over Mike's face. This was exactly what he needed to see, the real consequences of his actions. Actually, I said, pulling out my laptop, I might have some news about that. They both looked at me expectantly. I've been doing some research, I continued, opening my files. And I think I found something interesting about the wallet where Mike transferred half the funds. Mike nearly dropped the plate he was drying. You found the recovery phrase? Not exactly, I said, though the phrase was sitting in my encrypted folder. But I found a trail. The wallet's still active, and the coins haven't been moved. Hope flickered across their faces. How much? Mom asked quietly. If we can access it? About $1.2 million at current market rates. Mike sat down heavily. Sarah, why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you weren't ready, I said firmly. You needed to understand what you've done first. And speaking of understanding, I pulled out a stack of papers. How are those blockchain technology courses going? He actually smiled. Better than I expected. I finally understand what a private key actually is and how wallet security works. I can't believe I was trading all that money without really knowing how any of it worked. That's exactly why I didn't tell you about this sooner, I said. Knowledge matters, Mike. Real knowledge, not just hype and FOMO. Mom looked between us. So you can get the money back. Maybe, I said carefully, but it's going to take time, and there are no guarantees. In the meantime, I pulled out another document. I set up a monthly transfer from my savings to help with expenses. Sarah, no, Mom protested. We can't take your money. You're not taking it, I insisted. I'm helping my family. That's what we do, right? Help each other. The right way, not by gambling with people's futures. Mike flinched at that, but nodded. She's right, Mom. Let us help. Over the next 2 months, I watched Mike continue to change. He found a job at a local tech company. Entry level, nothing glamorous, but honest work. He attended his blockchain courses diligently, actually engaging with the material instead of just looking for get-rich-quick schemes. Most importantly, he spent time with our parents, really seeing them for the first time in years. He drove Mom to her doctor's appointments, helped Dad with house repairs they'd been putting off, and slowly began to rebuild their trust. One evening, after a family dinner, Mike pulled me aside. I know what you're doing, he said quietly. What do you mean? The recovery phrase. You've had it all along, haven't you? I studied his face, looking for signs of his old entitled anger, but saw only tired acceptance. What makes you think that? He laughed softly. Because you're you, Sarah. You've always been 10 steps ahead of everyone else. You probably found it weeks before the crash, didn't you? I nodded slowly. I was monitoring your transactions. I saw where you moved the funds, and I found the phrase when I was going through your backup files. Why didn't you stop me before I lost the rest? Would you have listened? I asked. Or would you have accused me of being jealous of your success, like you did when I warned you about the risks? He had the grace to look ashamed. You're right. I wouldn't have listened. I had to learn the hard way. And have you? Learned? He gestured around the kitchen, at the dishes he'd just washed, the grocery list he'd made for Mom, the budget spreadsheet on his laptop. I think I'm starting to. It's not just about the money, is it? It's about responsibility, about thinking beyond yourself. I pulled out my phone and opened my encrypted files. The recovery phrase is yours, I said, showing him the screen. But think carefully about what you do with it. There's more at stake here than just money. He stared at the string of words that could restore half of what he'd lost, but didn't immediately reach for my phone. Can we wait? He asked. I want to finish my courses first, really understand what I'm doing. And maybe we should talk to a financial advisor about the best way to handle it. I smiled, feeling proud of my little brother for perhaps the first time in years. That, I said, sounds like a very good idea. 3 months later, we sat down with our parents and a financial advisor to discuss the recovered funds. The money wouldn't fully replace what was lost, but it would ensure they could retire comfortably, if modestly. Mike insisted that the funds be placed in a conservative investment portfolio, with him having no direct access. I've learned my lesson, he said when Mom tried to protest. Some things are too important to risk. As we left the advisor's office, Mike turned to me. "Thank you," he said. "Not just for saving the money, but for teaching me what it really means to take care of family." I hugged him, remembering the arrogant crypto bro he'd been just months ago. "That's what big sisters are for," I said. "To help you learn from your mistakes. Even when the mistake is $2.4 million? Especially then." Today, our family is stronger than ever. Mom retired properly, with Dad joining her. They never did buy that condo in Florida, but they seem content with their modest lifestyle and weekly family dinners. Mike continues to work at the tech company, where he's been promoted twice. He's paying back what he can to our parents, though they insist it's unnecessary. More importantly, he's found purpose in helping others avoid the mistakes he made, volunteering to teach financial literacy at the local community center. As for me, I keep the story of the recovery phrase as a reminder that sometimes the best way to help someone isn't to save them from their mistakes, but to help them learn from them. Last week, Mike brought his new girlfriend to family dinner. When she mentioned being interested in cryptocurrency, I watched him launch into a careful explanation of blockchain technology, investment risks, and the importance of doing thorough research. "The most expensive lesson I ever learned," he told her, "was that there are no shortcuts to building something worthwhile." Mom squeezed my hand under the table, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters. The recovery phrase still sits in my encrypted files, a reminder of both how much we almost lost and how much we gained. But these days, its value isn't measured in cryptocurrency or dollars. It's measured in the lessons learned, the trust rebuilt, and the family bonds strengthened through crisis. As I watched Mike help Dad with the dishes later that evening, discussing responsible investment strategies and the importance of diversification, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best returns don't come from the market, they come from learning who you really are and what truly matters. The crystal stemware clinked as Eleanor Matthews raised her glass, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping it just a bit too tightly. The candlelight caught the enormous diamonds on her hand. A reminder, as if anyone needed one, of the Matthews family's wealth and status. "To my son," she declared, her voice carrying across the private dining room at Le Cirque, "who carries forward our family's proud legacy." Her eyes fixed on me, sharp as daggers. "Despite certain complications. My name is Sarah Matthews, though according to my mother-in-law, I'll never truly be a Matthews. After 5 years of marriage to her son James, I'm still the secretary who got lucky." If only she knew that while she was planning this elaborate anniversary dinner to remind me of my place, I had been in my office, closing a deal that would save the very legacy she was so proud of. "Mother," James said, a warning note in his voice. "Not tonight." Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so sensitive, darling. We're all family here." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, though some of us understand the weight of that name better than others. I took a sip of my wine, letting the expensive vintage roll across my tongue. 5 years ago, her words would have cut deep. Now they just made me think of the signed contract sitting in my office safe, and the look that would be on her face tomorrow at the board meeting. "How is the company doing, James?" Eleanor turned to her son. "Your father would be so proud to see you at the helm of Matthews Industries." I watched my husband's face carefully. James was handsome, successful, and completely unaware that his company was on the brink of collapse, or that I had spent the last 6 months secretly working to save it. "Everything's fine, Mother," he replied, but I could see the tension in his jaw. James was a brilliant engineer, but he'd never had his father's head for business. The company had been bleeding money for years, and he'd been too proud to admit it. Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Of course it is. Matthews men always succeed." She turned her attention back to me. "Though I suppose that's hard for some people to understand. Not everyone grows up with business in their blood." Eleanor, my father-in-law's brother, Uncle Robert, cut in. "Perhaps we could discuss something else." But Eleanor was on a roll now, fortified by several glasses of expensive wine. "I'm simply saying that some people might find it difficult to appreciate the pressures of running a family company, especially when their previous experience was mainly answering phones and getting coffee." The table fell silent. I could feel everyone's discomfort. The Matthews family had never quite known how to handle Eleanor's thinly veiled disdain for her son's choice of wife. What none of them knew, what even James didn't know, was that I hadn't just been a secretary at Matthews Industries. I had been working on my MBA at night, studying the company's operations, seeing problems that everyone else seemed to miss. By the time I married James, I understood Matthews Industries better than most of its executives. And for the past 6 months, I had been secretly working to save it from bankruptcy. It started when I accidentally discovered some concerning financial reports in James's home office. The company was hemorrhaging money, losing contracts, and falling behind competitors. James was drowning, but his pride and his mother's expectations kept him from admitting it. Instead of confronting him, I began working behind the scenes. My old network from my secretary days proved invaluable: assistants and receptionists who knew everything that happened in their offices, who were happy to help the former one of them who had married the boss. Through them, I learned about a potential deal with Suntech, a rising star in the tech industry. They needed a manufacturing partner for their new line of products, and Matthews Industries had the facilities they needed. The problem was, no one at Matthews had taken their overtures seriously. Suntech was too new, too different from our traditional clients. But I saw the potential. Using my connections and working through intermediaries, I spent months nurturing the relationship, structuring a deal that would not only save Matthews Industries, but transform it for the modern era. This morning, I had finally closed the deal, $50 million upfront, with the potential for billions in ongoing contracts. Tomorrow at the board meeting, when Suntech's CEO announced the partnership, everything would change. Sarah? James's voice pulled me back to the present. You're very quiet tonight. I smiled at my husband, reaching for his hand under the table. Just thinking about tomorrow's board meeting. Eleanor's eyebrows rose. Oh, do you attend those now? How progressive of you, James. Sarah's insight is valuable, James defended, though I could hear the slight uncertainty in his voice. Even after 5 years, his mother's disapproval could still shake his confidence. I'm sure it is, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with condescension. Tell me, Sarah, what insights could you possibly offer about running a company that's been in our family for 3 generations? I met her gaze steadily. Sometimes a fresh perspective is exactly what a company needs, Eleanor. She laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Fresh perspective? My dear, you wouldn't know the first thing about running a business of this magnitude. This isn't like organizing the office Christmas party. I felt James tense beside me, but I squeezed his hand, silently asking him to let it go. Tomorrow would bring enough drama without adding to it tonight. Perhaps you're right, I said smoothly, raising my glass. To the Matthews legacy. Eleanor smiled triumphantly, clearly taking my response as submission. As she noticed the slight curve of my lips, the quiet confidence in my eyes, she dismissed it as the wishful thinking of a social climber who had married above her station. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of subtle jabs and backhanded compliments. Eleanor held court, reminiscing about the glory days of Matthews Industries, when her husband William had turned it into one of the largest manufacturing companies in the country. Your father had such vision, she told James. He could spot an opportunity a mile away. That's the Matthews instinct, something that can't be learned in some community college course. Another pointed look in my direction. I thought about the contracts in my office, about the months of careful negotiation, about the future I had secured for the company while they were all clinging to the past. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. After dinner, as we waited for the valet to bring our car, James pulled me close. I'm sorry about Mother, he said softly. You know how she gets. It's fine, I assured him, straightening his tie. Nothing she says matters. He studied my face. You seem different lately. More confident, like you know something the rest of us don't. I smiled, thinking of the board meeting tomorrow. Maybe I do. Care to share? All in good time, I said, kissing him lightly. Just promise me you'll be at the board meeting tomorrow. Don't let anything keep you away. He looked puzzled but nodded. Of course. Though I don't know why it's so important. It's just another quarterly review. If he noticed my slight smile, he didn't mention it. That night, as James slept beside me, I stayed awake, reviewing the events that had led to this moment. I thought about my first day at Matthews Industries, a fresh-faced secretary with an MBA dream. How Eleanor had walked past my desk every morning without so much as a glance in my direction. How James had been different, actually seeing me, appreciating my insights, falling in love with me despite his mother's opposition. I thought about the day I discovered how bad things really were at the company. The shock of seeing the true financial statements, the realization that the company's proud legacy was about to come crashing down. The decision to act, to save not just the company but my husband from the weight of failure. Tomorrow would change everything. The question was, would they be ready for it? My phone buzzed softly. A text from Angela, Suntech's CEO. Everything set for tomorrow. Can't wait to see their faces. I smiled in the darkness. Angela had become more than just a business partner over the months of negotiation. She understood what it was like to be underestimated, to have to prove yourself in a world that had already decided what you were worth. Get ready for a show, I texted back. The Matthews Industries boardroom was impressive by design. 40 stories up, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was meant to intimidate. The massive mahogany table, the leather chairs, the portraits of past CEOs lining the walls. Everything screamed old money, established power. I arrived early, watching the morning sun paint the city gold. The contracts were safely stored in my briefcase, along with a presentation that would change everything. James had already left for his usual morning meetings, completely unaware of what was coming. Eleanor arrived exactly 10 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin, wearing her trademark Channel suit and an expression of barely concealed disdain when she saw me. "Sarah, don't tell me you're actually staying for the board meeting." She made it sound like I was planning to crash a private club. "Of course," I replied calmly. "I wouldn't miss it." She sighed dramatically. "Really, James needs to set better boundaries. These meetings are for actual board members and executives, not—" She waved her hand dismissively, "family observers." Before I could respond, the other board members began filing in. I recognized them all. The old guard who had run Matthews Industries with William, who still saw me as the secretary who had somehow snared the boss's son. James arrived last, looking slightly harried. "Sorry, got caught up in the R&D meeting. What's on the agenda for today?" Theodore Wells, the CFO, cleared his throat. "Actually, we have some concerning matters to discuss regarding the company's financial position." Before we get to that, I interrupted smoothly, standing up. "There's something else that needs to be addressed." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Sarah, dear, this really isn't the time for whatever this is." "Actually, Eleanor, this is exactly the time." I moved to the front of the room, pulling out my laptop and connecting it to the display screen. "You see, I've been working on something for the past 6 months. Something that's going to change everything for Matthews Industries." The room fell silent as I pulled up the first slide. Charts showing the company's declining revenues, lost contracts, mounting debts, everything they have been trying to hide. "What is this?" James asked, his voice tight. "Sarah, how did you get these numbers?" I finished for him. "I've always had access to them, James. I've been watching our company slowly die while everyone in this room pretended everything was fine." Eleanor stood up, her face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. You had no right to access these documents. James, are you going to let your wife—" "Mother," James cut in, staring at the screen. "These numbers, are they accurate?" Theodore shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, we've been trying to find a way to tell you. The situation is quite serious." I clicked to the next slide. 6 months ago, I started working on a solution. Something that would not only save Matthews Industries but transform it for the future. The boardroom door opened and Angela Chen walked in, followed by her executive team. Eleanor's mouth fell open as she recognized the CEO of Suntech. "Ms. Chen?" James stood up, confused. "I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled." "That's because the meeting wasn't with you, James," Angela said, smiling at me. "It was with Sarah." I pulled out the contracts from my briefcase. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that Matthews Industries has just entered into a historic partnership with Suntech, a $50 million immediate investment with projected contracts worth billions over the next decade." The room erupted in chaos. Board members talking over each other, James staring at me in shock, Eleanor looking like she might faint. "This is impossible," Eleanor finally managed. You're just a secretary. You couldn't possibly." "Actually," Angela interrupted, "Sarah has proven to be one of the most brilliant strategists I've ever worked with. She saw the potential for this partnership months ago, when everyone else was too caught up in the past to see the future." I distributed copies of the contracts. The deal is already signed. Suntech gets the manufacturing capability they need, and Matthews Industries gets the innovation and capital it desperately needs. A perfect partnership. James was reading through the contract, his expression a mix of amazement and something else. Pride, maybe. Sarah, this is incredible. But why didn't you tell me? I moved to stand beside him. Because you needed to be protected. If the deal hadn't worked out, if I had failed, no one would have known how close we came to losing everything. Your reputation would have been safe. Protected. Eleanor scoffed, though her voice wavered. You went behind everyone's back, made decisions about our family company. I saved our family company, I corrected her firmly. While you were also busy protecting the Matthews legacy, you nearly destroyed it. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see what the insiders are too close to notice. The board members were murmuring amongst themselves, reviewing the contracts with growing excitement. The terms were excellent. I had negotiated from a position of knowledge rather than desperation, creating a deal that would benefit both companies. Angela stepped forward. I'd like to make another announcement. Given Sarah's extraordinary work on this deal and her clear vision for the future, Suntech would like to recommend her for a position on the Matthews Industries board. Eleanor made a choking sound. This is absurd. She's not qualified. Actually, Theodore interrupted, looking up from the contracts, looking at what she's accomplished here. I'd say she's more than qualified. This deal, it's brilliant. It saves us from bankruptcy while positioning us for growth we haven't seen in decades. James stood up, taking my hand. I second the nomination. My wife has proven she understands this company better than any of us. One by one, the board members voiced their agreement. Eleanor sat there, her face pale, as her carefully maintained world order crumbled around her. Well, I said, squeezing James's hand, I believe we should vote on it. All in favor? Every hand in the room went up, except Eleanor's. She stared at me, finally seeing me clearly for the first time. How? She whispered. All this time. Because you never bothered to look past what you thought you saw, I replied. You were so convinced I was just a secretary who got lucky that you never noticed I was actually a businesswoman who got smart. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of discussions about integration plans and future strategies. I watched as the old guard of Matthews Industries finally began to understand that their world had changed, and that I had been the one to change it. After the meeting, James pulled me into his office. Why didn't you tell me how bad things were? That the company was nearly bankrupt? I touched his face gently, because I knew you were doing your best. You're brilliant with the technical side, James, but sometimes love means protecting the people we care about while we fix what's broken. He laughed softly. Protect me? Sarah, you saved everything. The company, our future, my family's legacy. You're extraordinary. Does this mean you're not angry I kept it from you? He pulled me close. Angry? I'm in awe of you, and a little bit terrified, if I'm honest. Later that evening, as we were leaving the office, we ran into Eleanor in the lobby. She looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than she had at dinner the night before. Sarah, she said, her voice unusually hesitant. I owe you an apology, many apologies actually. I studied her face, seeing the genuine struggle there. You never gave me a chance, Eleanor. You decided who I was the moment you saw me at that desk. Yes, she admitted. I was wrong. So wrong. What you did today, you didn't just save the company. You protected my son, our family name. You did everything I accuse you of being incapable of doing. The question is, I said quietly, what happens now? She straightened her shoulders, and for a moment I saw the proud Matthews matriarch again. But then she surprised me by smiling, a real smile, not her usual social mask. Now I hope you'll give me the chance to get to know my daughter-in-law. The real one, not the one I imagined. James squeezed my hand. Dinner next week, Mother. Maybe at our house this time. Eleanor nodded. I'd like that. And Sarah, thank you for seeing what needed to be done and having the courage to do it. As we walked to our car, James looked at me with a mix of love and admiration. You know, for someone who claims she married into the Matthews family, he might be the best Matthews of us all. I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The years of dismissal and doubt, the months of secret work, the triumph of today's reveal. But most importantly, I thought about the future we could now build together. I didn't marry into the Matthews family, I said, smiling at my husband. I married you. Everything else was just business. He laughed, pulling me close. Remind me never to play poker with you. As we drove home, my phone buzzed with a message from Angela. Dinner next week. We should discuss phase 2 of the expansion plan. I smiled, thinking of all the possibilities ahead. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's showing people exactly who you are and watching them realize how wrong they've been all along.